All right, live visuals there coming from Sandton. That's where Gauteng Finance MEC Lebogang Maile has, I suppose, finally detailed this key milestone that he had initially suggested was going to be announced today. Essentially, if you missed it, the Gauteng Finance Department has announced that they're going to be settling 3.8 billion rand of the 12.9 billion that is owed to SANRAL because of those controversial e-toll gantries that were implemented years ago. The context, of course, of the story is that after widespread public backlash, of course, the e-tolls were finally scrapped, and the announcement, at least the agreement from national government, is that they would foot about 70% of that bill and Gauteng would take about 30%. And we're now told that 3.8 billion of that 30% is now settled, with 4 other equal payments expected in June of every year until that particular amount is settled. OUTA, the organization undoing tax abuse, of course, has been amongst the organization at the forefront of pushing back against the e-tolls, and it's been quite the journey since then. Let's speak to their executive director now, Wayne Duvenage, as we take in this announcement from the Gauteng government. Wayne joining us now via our video link. And as always, Wayne, it's great to have you on the SABC. Thanks for being prompt in your getting us your reaction at this stage. In some ways, I mean, this is a bit different. I don't remember ever getting an update of, this kind of debt being settled at each stage. But, with the principle of transparency in mind, this is a good thing.
Well, it's a good thing in that, it's transparent to a certain extent, but not to the extent that we have wanted. So, for instance, we've been saying for some time now, how is it possible that Gauteng got roped into settling a debt that was entered into at a national level? So National Treasury backed the bonds that SANRAL got. SANRAL's a national roads agency. And the Gauteng province had no decision in this e-toll matter, which has obviously failed. But Treasury has been giving SANRAL money to fund the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project debt. And here we find over the last year or so, less than a year, suddenly the province is now picking up not only 30% of SANRAL's debt on the Gauteng Freeway Improvement Project, but also 4 billion rand towards maintenance of an asset that is not on their books, it's on SANRAL's books. And so we really are concerned about this. And now suddenly we hear another 3 billion rand, so it's gone up from 17 to 20 billion rand. There isn't enough transparency, there isn't enough explanation, and accounting principles don't seem to be applied meaningfully.
Not to split hairs, but for viewers who are wondering why it matters who pays the debt, what's your response to that? Because either way, it's taxpayers' money, they might say.
Oh, yeah. I mean, everything is paid for by society, by taxpayers. You're quite right. Why it matters, though, is that Gauteng province now, which is funded 95% from Treasury, by the way, is now having to pull back on its funding allocations to things like, as they say, hospitals, schooling, social development. We know that they really have tightened their budgets on social development, and the NGOs that receive that funding are now in a dire situation. So it does matter that SANRAL gets its budgets so that it can allocate funds. And now suddenly there's 17 billion rand that's sucked out of the system from them. And that does make accounting for residents in the Gauteng province, who's the most cash positive province from a contribution to government, by the way, is suffering as a result of it. So it does matter.
Fair enough. If my math is anything to go by, and I'm a mere journalist, so perhaps you'll set me correct here. If we're making 3.8 billion rand payments, that of course exceeds the 12.9 billion that Gauteng apparently has to owe back. I presume that's because of the interest that's being charged. How much of an interest should we have in that? Because surely the terms of these repayments must also be considered, especially when you consider how we got here.
Yeah, look, this again is where we're asking for more clarity. I mean, here's one government department charging interest to another government department, quite frankly, if it is related to interest, and it shouldn't be the case. So we want to know now, how does this 20 billion rand, which is the latest number, now it's gone up by 3 billion rand, how is that made up? Why is it made up? And again, to our original question, why on earth did you agree to this debt in the first place? But I guess if Treasury is the one that funds you by 95%, you don't want to bite the hand that feeds you. And if Treasury says you will pay 30%, well, then you will. But the principle needs to be explained and argued here, which we've not received a clarity on.
Yeah. Speaking of principle, I mean, there was an interesting question from one of the journalists around people who've already paid over that money. And last I checked, this is the most clarity we've ever received on that. Lebogang Maile unequivocally saying they will not get that money back. And his rationale is that at the time when they were making this payment, it was legal to do so. And so I suppose he's saying they can't really justify paying that money back to those motorists. But if the principle is that these gantries shouldn't have been there to begin with, is that fair?
Yeah, it's a good question. First of all, Panyaza Lesufi said just over a year ago that they will be refunding, and now, thankfully, Maile has taken a leaf out of our book and said, we've said, look, they didn't have to make that comment, and they don't have to pay it back, because at the time, the process was introduced not unlawfully, let's put it that way. The fact that they were unable to continue with it because of the public defiance campaign and now says that, well, what's going to happen with those individuals who have paid? Well, first of all, I think the province is broke. Secondly, it doesn't come from the province; it comes from SANRAL. And if anybody's going to settle that 7 or so billion rand that they've collected from the motorists over the last 10 years, it's going to have to come from SANRAL, not from the province. I don't think they'll be able to get those funds back, and those who haven't paid, they're certainly not going to be able to extract those funds from motorists.
Yeah. And then there's always that question, of course, around what on earth happens with these gantries. What's your understanding around who ultimately owes them on the other side of this debt being paid, before we even speak about whether or not, in fact, they are being used for anything else?
Well, again, these assets are on the books of SANRAL. Right. SANRAL will have reached some agreements, we believe, with the province to start doing speed over distance monitoring, law enforcement, using cameras for policing purposes. And we think that's a good thing. It would be sad to see these assets become stranded and not put to other use, so that somewhere along the lines, government of whichever level is going to claw back some funding over time. But, we shouldn't be using speed trapping as a revenue source. It should be there to reduce accidents and illegal conduct on roads. Hopefully they're doing that properly.
Yeah, that's a whole other jar of worms that we're not going to open. Yeah. But since we're speaking about, motorist behavior and the likes, I might as well take advantage of us speaking to you at the time of our breaking news here, Wayne. The petrol price going down yet again. I think this is the 5th consecutive decrease. But the question I wanted to ask you is that it seems there's changing sentiment around the country. And I know as OUTA, you've watched very closely issues around sentiment in your interest in the fight against corruption, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the sense that you're also getting as an organization, that, there is a whole lot more of an upbeat kind of sentiment around the economy? And this is, I suppose, one of the ways in which that's manifesting.
Absolutely. That's a very good point. You see, as we come into this new 7th administration with the government of national unity, society is seeing green shoots of good governance starting. I mean, we're a long way off from where we should be, but the traction is in the right direction. And so you see the rand strengthening, and with a stronger rand, and consequently at the same time, oil prices coming down on an international basis. Those two factors alone are responsible for these recent decreases, and another big decrease in the petrol price that is coming. So we benefit when the international community looks at South Africa and says, here's a situation that could be turning the country around, moving in the right direction, good governance, good administration and processes, and the consequences of that is a stronger rand, more demand to do business with South Africa. So these are the consequences of the green shoots of what we believe is a good situation. And we are finding that the doors that we used to knock on in government in the past that were constantly closed and locked are now starting to open. Government is starting to listen to some of our concerns, our problems, our solutions to dealing with corruption and maladministration in South Africa. And this is a good sign.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. I mean, you'll forgive some of the cynics and the skeptics among us who remember moments where, for example, there was Ramaphoria and other instances where there seems to have been other kinds of euphoria, and are worried, quite frankly, that this is going to be short-lived. How do we keep this momentum, at least from OUTA's perspective?
Yeah, it's a good point. You know, I liken it to we're on a very bumpy road still, but we just need to keep this vehicle of government national unity on the road. Don't let it veer off the road. There are going to be distractions. There are going to be challenges along the way. But I think if we can just ask the politicians to keep their egos in their pockets and to make sure that we can get some sanity and some good governance processes in place, that the various initiatives at Business for South Africa at national level, engaging with civil society and other entities, if we can move in the right direction about building stronger governance, and by the way, dealing with the criminal elements that have infiltrated our systems and that type of work that has to be done by resourcing SARS, for instance, SIU, the Investigating Directorate, and the NPA. If we can just get those bodies doing their work a lot faster, more accountability, then I think we're on the right track. If we don't, if we lose momentum, if we allow ourselves as the authorities and the people in positions of power to be distracted by what's happening, and we lose this momentum, that'll be dire for the country.
Yeah, fair enough. Wayne Duvenage, really do appreciate your always being on hand to help us respond to these developments as they happen. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Wayne Duvenage is the Executive Director of the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, as we take in that announcement from the Gauteng Finance Ministry that they've now settled 3.8 billion rand of their portion of the e-toll debt, and also get your reaction to yet another petrol price decrease.